and welcome to this new episode of our podcast, Peace Today. This is a podcast that talks with people from all over the world who are dedicated to building a more peaceful world. Something which is very necessary and very important because our world is full of war and conflict and bloodshed. And only by understanding where this all comes from and where war originates, we can also start thinking about how to solve these problems that are occurring in the world today. So I'm very happy that I can talk today with Maya Vodopivec, who is an assistant professor in peace and conflict studies at Leiden University, who has studied deeply the root causes of peace, of war, and also can explain us from many different perspectives, many different wars, like what is at the core, what starts war, and how can we also understand and try to improve the relations between people and countries so that there is a more peaceful world. So Maya, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, so as I said in my introduction, actually I think very often that people who are deciding about our lives in terms of whether to start a war or not, whether to arm to the teeth, as our king just recently said, or not, whether they actually understand what they are doing and whether they actually understand why they take such drastic decisions. You lecture at Leiden University and you explain to your students where wars come from.
Yes.
In a sense, and I think there's a lot of misleading information about that. Can you maybe explain a bit like how regularly in media and journalists, but also academics, how they usually talk about these so-called root causes and whether this sort of accepted opinions are true enough or whether there's actually a deeper layer behind it?
Well, we should always doubt the official truths, and I think that academia is really, especially the teaching, became academic research as well, became production and reproduction of a certain knowledge without really questioning the interests behind the production of such knowledge. Because while facts, I say to my students, are always facts, we should never revise the facts. The knowledge, how we explain certain facts, that can really vary a lot. And I teach different classes in the field of peace and conflict studies and also history, especially Asian history. The knowledge production question is something like a common thread in all my courses. I find it really exciting to learn about the knowledge production, about the vocabulary that has entered our academic fields, and about how do we explain, for example, how do we explain conflict.
Yes.
And I learned, and I'm in the dominant school of peace and conflict studies since the end of the 1990s, end of the Cold War, early 1990s, says that there are like three big groups of causes of conflict. And first, it's about the cultural causes, like there is this cultural argument that conflict is caused by primordial, since ever differences between ethnicities or religions or civilizations. Then there is the second group. It was quite dominant in the 90s, early 2000, produced by World Bank, focusing on greed and grievances. And the third group...
Can you explain the second one a bit?
Well, Peter Collier and some other researchers, they were explaining causes of conflict with either greed. So you have groups that are looting, that it pays more than peace, that the peace dividend is lower than the looting and plundering dividend, or grievances, or that certain groups are deprived from access to resources. So from grievances, you start an armed conflict. And the third group of causes of conflict focused on so-called rogue or undemocratic regimes, and the root cause of conflict is a dictator or totalitarian regime. And I somehow, because I was born and raised in Yugoslavia, I don't like even to call it former Yugoslavia. For me, it will always be Yugoslavia. My background is so mixed, and I was born at the heart of that Yugoslavia in this multi-ethnic religious Sarajevo. And especially I was born and raised in socialist Yugoslavia, where we really didn't care about ethnicity or religion. And when I was learning about peace and conflict studies in Tokyo, I felt like that whole my body is against that explanation. I just couldn't accept that was the root cause, you know, identities or certain deprivation on the side of certain ethnicities. But at the same time, in the academic articles, books, the evidence was so overwhelming. We did kill each other, raped, cut throats along those ethnic lines. So it was really a long journey for me to understand why such explanation could be wrong.
Yeah.
And why labeling our conflicts as ethnic conflicts and our problem as ethnic hatred is problematic.
So, can you explain how that discovery came about? Or because was it first you already felt from yourself that something must be wrong, and yet you saw in all the literature that there was a lot of ethnic killing and etc.
Well, I was aware that result of that conflict was a breakup of a country that was built on different values. And I was aware that happened at the end of the Cold War, and it happened with the liberal triumphalism, liberal democratic triumphalism, end of history, as we all know. And I somehow, I was also aware of certain hypocrisies, and that democracy was promoted from the outside, and that those who were supported, those forces, and those were ethnic nationalist parties who revised history, who weaponized also the historical disputes in our region, have been supported by that same democratic West. And I expected in Yugoslavia, we had such a good image of USA, really good image. And I just expected that it can't be that America will not support Yugoslavia. And we had options. We had Reformist Party, if not Communist Party, we had Reformist Party. And the Prime Minister, the last Prime Minister of Yugoslavia was Ante Marković. He was from Croatia and the leader of that Reformist Party. And his memoirs, he wrote that he was promised a help from the West for his option, but that help has never come. And then I already somehow felt something is wrong there. And especially because that liberal peace building failed. And it failed most obviously in Bosnia after so much investment because the solution to conflict depends on your understanding of the conflict.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And what was really also, and the solution institutionalized the divisions. And I felt that it was a sort of neocolonialism in terms of using the divisions to actually, successfully rule. And at the same time, we did not experience only conflict and later peace building, but that was a transition, economic transition, social transition.
Are you talking now about, after the fall already of Yugoslavia, or before it had taken place? Before that?
Well, we first had democracy, yes, and then came war.
Yes.
So there was no war for democracy.
No, I see.
The Communist Party allowed for a multi-party system in Yugoslavia, but what actually really happened is explosion of nationalisms.
Yeah, so you say the liberal peace building, and then you mean peace building after the war.
The conflict, yes. That has introduced certain solution, which institutionalized the divisions in Bosnia. So I think that, for example, today, Bosnia is probably much more divided society than in 1995 when war ended. But liberal peace building is a package. It's not only peace, it is reform. It's a transition to a market economy. It's a reform of the legal system. It's a reform of, it's a very comprehensive reform of society. And somehow, somewhere in that transition, like to an ideal model that was set by the West, towards the norm that was set by the West, our societies got lost. And I'm always wondering why.
And do you have an answer?
Well, I do, because first those conflicts did not solve anything. Those conflicts did not bring a healthy democracy, and I don't think that they had potential to bring a healthy democratic societies. We were ethnicized, and in that ethnicization and of our societies, there was. I think that ethnicization is quite necessary. Weaponization of ethnicity is quite necessary for Western white hegemony to function, and that's why it was never really the goal of our of peace building.
But can you say, because you say liberal peace building failed, but you can also say it succeeded because it was not the idea to have a real peace building then. I mean, this is maybe what liberal peace building is.
Yes, of course. They want to convince you that that's the way to go. And at the same time, there is always certain ethnicity that is considered to be pro-democratic. And it's usually pro-Western, and then those who resist or who criticize, they're considered to be anti-West. And I think that there was really no political will to do something better there.
But can we talk a bit more about Yugoslavia if you want?
Yes, of course.
So why was it that Yugoslavia was targeted in the first place for this kind of transition? Because, as I understand from other people, as you say, like, it wasn't expected. You were living in a society where ethnicity and religion didn't play much of a role, but suddenly it became a role. So why was Yugoslavia sort of? It was deliberate, I think, this transformation into ethnicization, if you call that the term. So why was it that Yugoslavia was, maybe it was the first target after the fall of the Soviet, the Berlin Wall, etc.
Well, we were not even close to Soviet Union or to communism there. We were quite proud of saying our historical no to Stalin in 1948, when we didn't know if Stalin will send tanks or not, like he did to Hungary or to Czechoslovakia. But Yugoslavia was, I think, some sort of a metaphor for that third way.
Yeah.
We were very much involved in the Third World project. And that was a project. Third World is not a place. Third World was a project.
An ideal.
Yes, and Yugoslavia was a founder of Nonaligned movement in 1961, together with Nasser and Nehru. And I think with the spirit that we had, we were not anti-Western country at all.
No.
We were very anti-capitalist. We were criticizing capitalism, but we were not anti-Western at all. No. I remember in my school, in primary school, we had the lottery, like which language you will learn. I think on offer was English, French, German, and Russian. And I mean, my classroom got English, and we were celebrating a lot. Unlike some, like who draw Russian. I wish I draw, because English you learn more or less. But we also didn't hate. I think that the relations normalized after Stalin's death with the Soviet Union. But Yugoslavia was considered to be the softest socialist regime, open, we could travel.
Lots of my classmates went to Yugoslavia for holidays at the time.
Croatian seaside, I really love. Montenegro is beautiful too. But we truly believed, I grew up believing in those values, that we should not succumb to the material interest, the profit, but we should lead our own independent politics. And at that time, if you look at those videos, establishment of non-aligned movement, you could see a variety of countries representing a variety of political systems. But what they had in common is that belief, hope, that we can hold, our small countries can hold their destiny in their own hands. And I think that Yugoslavia would probably aspire to join European Union for sure, but to become a member of a military bloc, I think with the spirit that we had, it would have been quite impossible. And today you have like a majority of those republics are not members of the EU, but they are members of the NATO. So Slovenia and Croatia are EU, and they are also members of NATO. Then Montenegro is a member of NATO. I think North Macedonia as well. And then, you know, what is also against this liberal peace building, actually not against, but against the logic. How can you promote peace with bombs? And peace was promoted with the bombs. There is this democratic peace thesis that democracies do not wage wars against each other, which is true, but what we don't often mention is that democracies can be quite aggressive towards non-democracies. And the NATO
it's also
bombing,
not always true, is it? I mean, aren't Pakistan and India both considered to be somehow democratic?
Democracies, yes, yeah, exactly, exactly. It's not always true. Yeah, that's a good example. But I think that the NATO bombing of at that time Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and in 1999, and so it was a bombing of a sovereign state. It was illegal. There was no UN authorization. And the result of that so-called humanitarian bombing was an independent state. And I think that was the moment when actually any hope for multilateralism was lost. I believe that was probably the most crucial moment in the post-Cold War history. We know that Russia is using that example for the annexation of Crimea, for example. Russia in 1999 was against bombing, of course, but Russia was for multilateral solution, and but it was weak, and it was ignored, it was humiliated by the West.
But you mean by multilateralism, you mean the whole UN system, actually? Or
yeah, the UN system and multilateralism in Europe would mean inclusion of all European countries.
Including Russia.
Exactly, including Russia, into discussing security issues. And we know that Russia in 1999 was ignored, humiliated, and of course the promise in 1989 that NATO will not expand to the east was also not respected.
So thanks for sharing this analysis of what happened to Yugoslavia, the tragic fate of that country. So what should it teach us about we've been talking about the root causes, and ethnicity is very easily blamed for a lot of things. Well, it's more, you say actually it's a method of creating divisions, etc. It's not a root cause. So if that is the case, so what can we then, what does it teach us about those root causes? If it's not really ethnicity, it's not really religion.
Well, the root cause can be expansion of Western hegemony to places that were not incorporated. Yugoslavia was definitely not incorporated. Yugoslavia was the third military power in Europe. With the so-called Balkan Wars, it's quite efficiently incorporated. I think Serbia is still resisting, or Serbia is trying to play both sides, both sides. But we actually can and should introduce into the equation of root causes the geopolitics, the Western hegemonic interests, and So that is something we tended to ignore.
Does it not align most with the analysis of the World Bank then, with greed and the ones who want more than they should and the ones that suffer because of that? Isn't that the closest analysis to?
I don't think so. Greed and grievance actually applies mostly, to those paramilitary groups or rebels, and that's how we can explain, the fight for resources.
Yes, but in a way, the West acts like such a rebel group, it's fighting for resources.
That's an interesting view. I somehow greed is definitely a cause.
Yeah. Or isn't that an integral part of the empire? Let's say it's never enough. Isn't the empire always about sort of exploitation and about pulling resources from the margins to the center?
Of course. That's the goal. Yeah. That's the goal. And then at the same time, since ever, the empires or imperial powers were trying to justify their dominance, and they were trying to justify it because it was always the West that is setting the standard or the norm that others should follow. Yes. And it is West that is civilized. It is the West that needs to be civilized. Yeah. It is the West that is rational. Yeah. It is East that is irrational. Yeah. And it is
the garden and the jungle.
Yeah, with the Borel. That was terrible. And my students, when I mentioned that recently, they did not even know. I don't know how they missed that. But I was last year at a conference in Kyoto. It was a conference on neutrality, and there were some African participants, and they mentioned that immediately. So I always say that we really don't know how the rest sees
Of the world looks at us. Yeah.
No. And so, yeah, and we tend to believe that we are, this Enlightenment idea of history, that we are on the line to progress. But I think we live in times when it's really deeply questioned, that idea. And of course, on that line towards progress, West is always more advanced. And who is more advanced have the right to set the norm for those who are backwards. And you can, label people as backwards on so many levels, including, religion, ethnicity, etc., civilization.
For me personally, and I don't know if you agree, but I think Gaza is the main maybe reason, or why at least young people are seeing that this is simply not true. That the whole image that the West built after the Second World War of this progressive sort of group of nations that is the light for the world, about human rights and freedom and democracy, etc. I mean, people could have seen it already in Yugoslavia, for instance, that this bringing peace by bombs, or in Libya, or they could have seen it in Iraq, and they could have seen it, if they wanted to, they could have already understood that this is a very two-sided, hypocritical way. But I think Gaza makes it maybe even more unavoidable that actually especially the European Union has just nothing to say, and has just nothing to, morally in the world. You mention other people, how they look at us.
They had a lot to say, but they said wrong things.
Yeah.
It would have been good if they said nothing, but they said very wrong things. They went immediately to Tel Aviv to say that Israel has rights to self-defend.
We have nothing to say, let's say, in terms of we are morally better or whatever than the rest of the world. I mean, we should have been silent.
Yeah, that's true. That's I think that the Western world under Pax Americana has exhausted all its possibilities. And the reason and imagination is really at its end, and it's been substituted with militarization, with more and more violence. And I think that I'm very proud of my students who are also involved in the pro-Palestine movement. I think it's incredibly important, and if the war in Ukraine failed to appeal to the conscience of people, Gaza did not. I think that is it's very bad what is happening in Gaza. I cannot say it's good, but in terms of raising the conscience about the Western global hegemony and the white settler colonialism is important step in realizing what is happening in the world.
For me, it's remarkable how much our politicians are still holding on to this sort of totally wrong self-image of human rights, etc. Especially during our Liberation Day that we have, and the commemoration of the dead of the Second World War on 4th and 5th of May in the Netherlands. It was even more remarkable, I think, when Rutte went 2 years ago to the commemoration of the massacre at Srebrenica and was crying tears, not literally, but in his words, like, this was so atrocious and sorry, we did wrong, etc. While at the same time he was materially, economically, militarily supporting Israel in exterminating Gaza. So, but we still keep on harping the same words about human rights and democracy and freedom, especially when it comes to Ukraine. And I think, can you maybe compare those two, because it's very hard for many people who yeah, there's many people who say, yeah, Gaza, I can see that we are acting wrong there. But many even organizations say, no, but if it comes to Ukraine, there we're actually protecting human rights because we are defending a nation that is attacked by an aggressor. And we are supporting their right to self-determination and their democracy and their freedom as a nation, etc. So they make a very big distinction between what the West is doing around Gaza and in Israel, Palestine, and what the West is doing towards Ukraine. Even big organizations would support the efforts. I won't name them, but I know them.
I know them too.
Yeah.
So and I know many people. I think that Gaza may not be the biggest test for thinking critically about the world in which we live, and Ukraine is the strongest test.
And can you explain that?
And I'm afraid that we are not ready to think critically about the Ukraine war. I was, after reading a book, The Undercommons, Politics Around, by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten, I learned about their thinking about the reverse logic of white settler colonialism. And that reverse logic of white settler colonialism is about self-defense, and they start with the analysis of Michael Parenti of Hollywood movies, for example Shaka Zulu and some others, where colonizers are in a fortress and they're surrounded by natives who are attacking them. And if you're looking at that scene, those who are in the fortress, the colonizers, they really defend themselves. But they argue, forget about the politics around, and we forget about the real life outside.
And forget about the primal aggression that was committed.
The primal, which is a intrusion of the West and colonizing their own land. Just after October 7 events, I think just a week after, we saw Ursula von der Leyen and this Metsola. They went to Tel Aviv to say that Israel has right to self-defense. President Zelensky also went to Tel Aviv to say that Israel has the right to self-defense. You mentioned Srebrenica, and it's a huge topic, but organizations in Srebrenica did not really stand up for Palestine in this period. They actually had a press conference with a rabbi. So we will not go into that because it's a very big topic. But to go back to Ukraine, there is no doubt that according to the international law, Russia invaded a sovereign state. However, we are made to believe that Europe is self-defending itself in Ukraine. And that's the narrative. It's not only a defense of Ukraine, it's a defense of Europe in Ukraine. And that's quite dubious. I think that Europe and the US before Trump have pushed Ukraine into a war that really should have never happened. They weaponized the historical disputes in Ukraine. And since Euromaidan, there is a war in Ukraine and there is arming of the Ukrainian forces by the West. And there is an active war with the Russian minorities in the East that took weapons after the Euromaidan, a coup that was supported, a coup where the democratically elected government was removed. And I think that what is happening in Ukraine is, especially when we are sad that Europe is defending itself in Ukraine, and also this ethnicization of values, that Ukrainians are democracy-loving and freedom-loving, and Russians are barbaric, genociders, and all of that is was a very dangerous and very wrong thing to do. So, as for the reverse logic of self-defense in Israel-Palestine conflict, and that reverse logic has always been a pretext for genocidal violence throughout the history. So and you know what is really symptomatic is that we could not mention peace in Ukraine for a long time. It's mentioned now, and it's very symptomatic how it's now appropriated by the side that considered peace, mention of peace, to be treason.
Exactly.
You could not mention peace because Europe was convinced that they will win war.
Sure.
Now, when they lost war, and it's very clear that the war is lost, of course it's a war of attrition. It can last from now on for a very long time, but it can't be won. I think that now they talk about peace and diplomacy, but for more than 10 years, 2 years, we did not talk about peace and diplomacy. And in Gaza, it's still about self-defense. It's there is no
because
mention.
they are winning, or they're at least
Because they are winning,
Yeah.
they are overwhelmingly more
Destroying.
powerful.
Yeah.
But that substitution of reason and like political imagination with the weapons, more and more war, I think is the main characteristic of this end of Pax Americana.
Yes.
Potentially beginning of a decolonial world order, but a very violent one, because the West will not allow its hegemony to go away, and there are new emerging powers.
Yeah. So how far are we in that sense? How far on the road towards maybe dissolution is Pax Americana in your view?
I think that the Pax Americana is ending. There is an end of Pax Americana. It's clear how Trump withdrew from the Ukraine conflict, because to him it was very clear that that was a lost war. And the problem is that it will be very violent. I'm thinking also about East Asia. I'm thinking about China, Taiwan, and so many problems in different parts of the world. It's a big mess. I'm not sure what will come out of it, what kind of forces will come out of this, if this is a beginning of the colonial world order. I feel it's quite ambiguous what kind of world we will have, because I don't see a political imagination as maybe we had it in 1960s. That's the problem. I also don't see that West is stopping its militarization way. I think that our response to war is more war, not peace.
And with regards to one of your main subjects, which is knowledge production, have you seen a shift there in this period? Because
No.
How is it? And how did the Ukraine war, for instance, affect work at the university?
I think it affected very concretely my faculty of Governance and Global Affairs in Leiden University. That's a faculty in The Hague. They signed a memorandum of understanding with the NATO in November 2022. And
what does it
there
mean?
is a lot of, I don't know, because I could never find any document. It was just the news in a newsletter.
There's no
but
public
that means
document.
that there is a lot of collaboration with NATO. There is a lot of collaboration with Ministry of Defense. Maybe less than a month ago, my college, Liberal Arts and Sciences College, where it's considered to be a critical place, we have received an invitation from the Dutch Ministry of Defense, who is working in fields of conflict, security, etc., to come forward, because Ministry of Defense is interested to work with scholars. It's a very good way if you want to get funding nowadays, if you want to get promotion. And I think
it's a very easy scheme. I mean,
It's
money is taken away from university, it's given to defense, and now you are left. You have to work with them to.
Exactly. It's funny. The peace studies are being abolished in Europe. For example, I have a very good friend in Tromsø. Peace studies were abolished because there is no funding. There are no students. And then Ministry of Defense got so much money that they didn't know what to do with that. So they are opening some research center at the same place. And it's also
called peace studies then, or not?
I don't think so. It will be called a different.
Security,
I think
or
security studies. It's a very different approach than approach of peace studies. Security studies want to eliminate the threat. Conflict is seen as a threat. For example, terrorism, and you want to eliminate it. Peace and conflict studies would be to transform the conflict. You see it as a conflict, you want to transform it and to transcend. So those are very different approaches. I see that academics are putting their expertise into service of military industrial complex in their interests. And that is deeply problematic.
Do you have examples of that?
Well, for example, if you're an international law scholar, you may put your expertise at the service of finding the ways how Europe can arm itself by circumventing certain legal procedures. They talk about qualified voting majority, for example, if there is somebody who will put a veto, because the EU decisions must be made by consensus. So how can we circumvent the rules and the lengthy procedures of changing legal norms, treaties, whatever. So of course there are people also who resist. Their majorities will probably keep silent, but I think that's not our duty. We have a very privileged positions, privileged jobs, but also we have responsibility and duty to resist something that is wrong, and we don't see it for the first time. Students in 1968 were protesting against military-industrial complex. And they failed, unfortunately. Maybe we could have had a better world if they didn't. Several days ago, there was a sit-in at one of the buildings of the faculty in The Hague. And it was not an announced protest by students and staff. They occupied the building, but whoever wanted to get out could have gotten out, I've heard. But what was done after they were called to leave, majority left, one small group did not. And they called the riot police. People were arrested, and I'm very much against calling riot police on the students, arresting students or beating students that are non-violently protesting. So we have a problem in academia. We have a problem. It's very clear. The budget is cut. There is this securitization of knowledge trend. At the same time, not all of us see a connection between the two.
That's very strange, no?
Between securitization of knowledge and the budget cut.
It was even so far that there was a demonstration of universities against these budget cuts, on academia, because they're very obvious and they're very big.
Yes.
And but they didn't. So they last year they cancelled a protest because they were afraid that there were people with Palestinian flags, etc.
Yes.
Even though they don't see that their money is taken away. It's literally given to the army, to the Ministry of Defense, and it's therefore literally given to Israeli companies for a large part, because those are one of the biggest weapons producers, or Elbit systems and those kind of things, and they don't see that their money is taken away, it's given, and they don't support their beating up their students who are actually demonstrating the root cause of their problem.
And that's what I wanted to say. Until we see the connection between the two, there is no exit and there is no real criticism.
How come that academia, you're supposed to think that these the most clever people, they're the most critical people, etc. That's the image that at least they have, you know?
Well, we are trained to be critical. We should be trained to be responsible. But I think that there is a lot at play. There is, corporate media, lack of information, censorship, self-censorship, because you will be attacked if you criticize too much. There are certain taboos you should not touch upon. And you will be considered a traitor if you criticize militarization of Europe. So if you criticize what is happening, genocidal violence in Palestine, you will be called anti-Semite. Or it's a simple system, but it works to make people quiet.
What's lacking then? I mean, how come they have universities? You say it's a privileged position. Is that the cage where they are in, like afraid to lose that, or?
Well, I think, as our friend Lydia said in her movie Home Game, when the first shot is fired, you realize that the war has started way earlier. So the neoliberalization of the university has started way earlier, not now, not 2 years ago, not 3 years ago. And I think that we just didn't notice for a long time, and now we tend to look only at the symptom and not really at the history that led to that. So
which is neoliberalization.
Neoliberalization, and the rise of neocon forces as well.
Neocon forces.
Neocon forces. They were behind the rise of the global human rights discourse. We can go back to the 80s, to era of Reagan and Thatcher, and we can see that rise of a global human rights discourse and the focus on civil and political rights, and going away from social and economic rights that were at the forefront of agenda of the Third World Project, had a very organized mission. And the mission was to focus on civil and political rights and democracy, and to actually erase the demands of the Third World for more social and economic equality. And that was the time when revolutionary and liberation movements were criminalized. The Palestinian liberation movement was criminalized in 1980s. I think it was Reagan's decree, security decree 138 from 1984. So the rise of global human rights discourse went hand in hand with criminalization of revolutionary and liberation movements. And, I don't think we really know or are ready to think about that critically too. It's been decades of this brainwashing with, human rights, democracy, which are wonderful ideas, but they were used as ideologies to subjugate those who are not on the path that the West has set.
Yep. They were weaponized as well.
Weaponized, of course, weaponized, literally weaponized.
Yeah. I think that's still the problem when you talk to the organizations that I won't mention, but human rights and peace, so-called peace organizations, they mention actually the human rights, as a reason why we shouldn't go for peace at the moment. They say, for instance, in Ukraine, they say, well, the right comes first. So the rights have been violated of Ukraine. So we first had the rights have to be restored, and then we can talk about peace. That's the literal reason of several organizations at the point why they won't speak out on peace for Ukraine.
Well, I have a very different view of that, but I understand. Yeah, sometimes, it's about justice and peace. What should come first? First, justice is a very complicated concept. We cannot, it's a principle that the two sides need to agree upon. Mm-hmm. Peace is a value. We all can cherish the value not to have bombs falling on our heads. Mm-hmm. And I think that the peace, even if it's froze everything, should have been cherished more. And and about the rights, I mean it's complicated, and it's especially complicated when you have double standards for decades. And I think that it's not a helpful narrative anymore. Yeah. Just like, narrative democracies versus totalitarian regimes, is not very helpful in the situation in which we are. Yeah. It doesn't help. I think it just obstructs, thinking about possible solutions. Yes. But I'm a pacifist, so I would stop the war first, and then discuss everything else. And it's very difficult to expect that those double standards and the support for secessionist movements, different secessionist movements of minorities, when it played together with the Western interest, will not backfire. Mm-hmm. For example, in Ukraine. And with Ukraine and Russia. And Ukraine was a deeply divided society. We are again served with certain information that Ukraine is so unified in its resistance, but that's not true. That's not true. The war was there for almost a decade before the Russian invasion. And the Ukrainian forces were heavily armed by the West. If we invested all that money into making peace with the East and thinking a little bit along this idea of common security launched by Olof Palme, this assassinated Prime Minister of Sweden, I think we could have taken really a better path to solve the issues there. But it was a deliberate decision not to. So we are now seeing the consequences of that.
So as a final question or final remark, if you want, you already mentioned that you do not always comply with that's what people ask you from you as an academic. So working together with defense ministry wouldn't be your choice, let's say. But what can people else do? Because it's very easy, I think, to get sort of overwhelmed and depressed if you actually realize the mess that we are in. The build up towards a very big war. Because I think, even as ridiculous as it sounds, I think it's real, the desire to literally fight Russia. Why else build up such a massive military industry? So even though it's just posing, it's dangerous enough. So we are in a very dangerous stage of our own civilization, let's say. We are already, if you can call it civilization, when it leads to the destruction and elimination of a full people in the Middle East, etc. I mean, it's very easy to get sort of maybe even depressed or at least to not willing to engage anymore. Many people, also from my generation, they when I talk to them, they either say, I know it, I know that things are happening, but it's just too much, I can't handle, and I cannot understand also a reaction like that. So what would your reaction be to to those people?
My reaction would be not to collaborate for the beginning, and not to collaborate with the governments that are leading a disastrous politics.
Yes.
And what they're doing is disastrous for our collective security and future. And what I can do is not to collaborate. The second is that I can continue as long as I can to teach according to my conscience and according to the information I have. If I get new information, I'm really ready to change my opinion. But
what are you're teaching peace studies? What are the lessons from other, let's say, conflict situations that, in terms for population, how to act or how to behave or how to, you mentioned resistance, but is there other methods that you could recommend in order to sort of prevent the escalations that are being worked on at the moment?
I think we need more political imagination.
Yeah.
I don't see it around. I'm always thinking about this Hegel's master-slave dialectics. The moment the slave understands how the things work and how we are enslaved, all of us. That is the beginning of changing the dynamics. And of once you see what is happening to us, once we see what our governments are doing and endangering us collectively, leading us to a disaster, even bigger disaster than this, I think that then there is a hope. But I don't see it coming soon. Unfortunately, I'm somehow afraid that it has to hurt even more for the people to want to see the reality. It's like this, I think there is this Western fantasy that we live in democratic societies, that we are informed sufficiently, that we vote and, also decide through that way. I think that it is too strong. And it is, it would be wonderful if we would have journalists that actually do their job, but we don't. We have journalists who are massively collaborating. With this sort of war hysteria, if they try to resist, they will be removed, they will be attacked and removed. And people will still say nothing. So I'm not an optimist in that sense, but I also think that we can't give up.
No, sure. And political imagination, what would that be, or what could that look like? We cannot expect it really from politicians themselves.
No.
So what would it entail? Like, how can we stimulate more imagination, let's say, about... Can you say something about that?
I think that I can maybe talk from the point of view of academia. We should go back to our role as public intellectuals. We should be more relevant for the world around us, for the reality, and engage in, small steps. And show solidarity, try to connect, because somehow together we are stronger than individuals. And simply not to give up. I think there is, when you talk to people, like individually, there is reason.
Yes, there is reason.
But when there is this mass hysteria and there are people, aggressive people on the side who can't wait to attack you, as being a traitor or being a pro-Russian or being anti-Semite, etc. It's difficult to resist. So I think we have to find innovative ways. I don't know what those ways could be, but we have to be more relevant. for the world around us.
For the slaves to realize that they're slaves, maybe.
Yeah, to
Because
realize.
I think it's underestimated how many people realize that something is wrong.
I think so.
Only
I think
many
there
people-
is a critical mass of
Yes.
people who see that there is no logic.
Yeah, there's no logic.
There is no sense.
Only the narratives they're being fed are still also, not strong enough or wrong themselves. They know something is wrong, but they're
Yes.
being fed. For instance, by the right wing, they're fed the idea that the immigrants are the problem, or the Muslims are the problem, or whatever. So,
Or Russians are
or
problem.
Russians are the problem. So
And,
people know or see. I think
There is always
yeah.
this, the mechanism of threat. There is
Yeah.
a threat.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I may even see and agree with you, but there is a threat outside.
Yeah, exactly.
So we are choosing, lesser evil from the two or something like that. We should not give up.
Yeah.
I think that not bright times are ahead of us, but we don't have a choice.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much, Maya. It was
Thank
great
you.
to talk to you and to listen to your insights into the trouble we're in, but also in the way we can sort of resist that and help each other to educate and not to stop going what we believe in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.